Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is Psychical Research and Frederic Myers. Frederic Myers is the author of the classic book published in 1903 called Human Personality and Its Survival of Bodily Death, a wonderful 2-volume summary of decades of research from the British Society for Psychical Research. And my guest today, a member of that society, is Dr. Terence Palmer, who is the author of a book called The Science of Spirit Possession, an academic work largely based on the theories of Myers himself. Dr. Palmer is, in addition to being a member of the Society for Psychical Research, is a member of the Scientific and Medical Network in Great Britain and is also a fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine. Welcome again, Terry.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's lovely to be back again.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Frederic Myers is really one of the towering figures in the field of psychical research. I believe he died a couple of years before his classic work was even published, but I know it's highly revered by not only psychical researchers and parapsychologists, but the British Psychological Society had a huge commemoration of the 100-year publication of that book back in 2003.
Well, that's right. Frederic Myers was one of the original founding fathers of the Society in 1882.
The Society for Psychical Research.
That's
yes.
right, yes,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I discovered the work of Frederic Myers when I was going back to the previous discussion we had about spirit possession. I needed to find a scientific framework that could accommodate these phenomena. I was witnessing spirit possession phenomena and people's experiences, and I had my own experiences. But these experiences weren't acknowledged by society in general and by science. Yes. And I thought there was something not quite right about that. So I needed to find out whether these phenomena could be accommodated by some kind of scientific framework. And it was Myers that provided it for me.
I mean, today, even 100 years after Myers' great work, it's still something of a taboo topic.
It is, and taboo is the right word.
Mm-hmm.
It's a taboo that science really needs to step over, overcome this taboo.
But the Society for Psychical Research was founded in the 1880s for the very purpose of trying to apply scientific methods as they existed at that time to the questions of the interesting phenomenon of the human psyche, depth psychology, hypnosis, mesmerism, and in particular the question of survival of the human personality after death, because in that era spiritualism was a huge fad sweeping America and Europe.
My understanding is that the reason the society was formed by this group of intellectuals and scientists was because of this fad, as you put it, this fashion for experimenting with with seances. Started, if my understanding is correct, in New York with the Fox sisters, and became popular and was then imported into England and Europe. And became something of a parlour game for people in society. In fact, some well-known people in society used to participate.
Royalty.
And Charles Dickens and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who became
a devout spiritualist.
So it was very, very popular. But on the negative side, people were coming along and exploiting it for entertainment. And it lost its seriousness. So the society was formed in order to distinguish the difference between fraud and entertainment on the one hand, and the genuine experience on the other that could be validated by scientific investigation.
Yeah. And to my understanding, the methodology that they use would be comparable to what a criminologist would do in investigating a crime, or even an investigative journalist would do. They tried to document and get affidavits from all of the witnesses,
That's
and
right.
they did as much as they could in seance conditions to control, to prevent fraud.
Yes, they developed very, very stringent methodologies, which are still used today. The three essential criteria, if my memory serves me correctly, was more than one person witnessed the phenomena. Information received through any communication would have been completely unknown to the recipient and impossible for them to know. And the third criteria was that it could be externally validated from another source. And those were the criteria that Frederic Myers in particular used about spiritual communication. But further than that, what I discovered from my reading of Myers' work, and bear in mind at this time I'm a practicing hypnotherapist, so I have an understanding about how suggestion works. So when I discovered in my reading about Myers' research how he needed to understand the relationship between the hypnotist and the hypnotized and the rapport that existed between them.
Yes.
So he went back to the documented written evidence from mesmerism, going right back to the Marquis de Puysegur in the 18th century, a devout follower of Mesmer. And the Marquis wrote that he was concerned that some of his subjects, when they presented themselves to him for therapy, would actually arrive already in a trance. And although this was convenient because they didn't have to be induced into an altered state, it was also quite dangerous, and he expressed his concern about that. And when I discovered this, I thought, well, how does this work? So Myers was fascinated by this, and he conducted experiments with his colleague Edmund Gurney. And what they did was they blindfold subjects, and then from another room they exposed an agent to strong tasting substances like vinegar and anything with a powerful smell or a powerful taste, to see whether there was any connection between the taster and the sitter in another room. And there was, and it was statistically significant. The success rate in the transmission of taste sensations was irrefutable.
In other words, somebody is hypnotized in one room.
Doesn't need to be hypnotized.
Oh.
Just sit there blindfolded.
Somebody is sitting in a room blindfolded. In the other room, somebody is tasting a very strong taste. And is that person under hypnosis?
No. No.
Okay, so blindfold here, taste in the other room, and then they ask the blindfolded person, do you taste anything?
Yeah, that's right. And the results were astonishing. If my memory serves me correct, something like 75% accuracy.
So this would be the telepathic transmission of a taste sensation.
Of a taste sensation, yeah.
Okay.
They extended this further and tested physical sensations. The transmitter would, for example, pinch his arm, and the recipient would feel the pinch. Now
the transmitter is deliberately trying to send those thoughts?
Yes, it's intentional. Yes. So this began a whole series of experiments in what Myers called the community of sensation. What Mesmer hypothesized was some kind of fluid connection between
magnetic fluid.
He called it animal magnetism,
Yes.
didn't he?
Yes.
So, but as the hypnotists began to use hypnosis in surgery and therapy, James Braid, if my memory serves me correct, 1885, around about there, the surgeon James Braid.
The man who coined the term hypnosis.
He coined the term hypnosis, and he argued that it was all the power of suggestion.
Yes.
And dismissed this invisible connection.
Magnetic fluid.
And I discovered later, in fact, this is not in my book. I'm sure I discovered this later because, I mean, this subject is huge. You can
Yes, it
still
is.
continue investigating it. The surgeon with the Indian Army in Calcutta, James Esdale.
Yes.
He conducted more than 300 serious surgical
That's right. This was
operations.
before the era of anesthetics.
Before anesthetics.
Yeah.
And he wrote to James Braid and said, well, how do you explain this? I can be about to perform a surgery on a person and I need them to experience no pain. So I can be sitting in one room. The patient will be occupied by visiting relatives, and I can hypnotize him just by thinking about it, to the extent that and it's quite amusing to read the account, he just fell into his curry.
In other words, telepathic hypnotic induction.
Hypnotic induction.
Which was a subject of great interest to Myers.
Yes, he conducted experiments with Pierre Janet, with a subject that they called Madame B. Leone in Le Havre. And her physician, Dr. Guibert, would deliver suggestions to her while she was going about her business and get her to fall into a trance.
And he was at a distance, is that right?
At a distance,
Yes.
at a distance. Now, these experiments inspired the Russian neurologist at the University of Leningrad to see if there was any validity.
Vasiliev.
Leonid Vasiliev.
You're right.
Yes. And he started conducting experiments between Moscow and Sevastopol.
Yeah.
And again, the empirical evidence was irrefutable.
And I think the Soviets took quite an interest in those
Big
studies.
interest. And right away through the 20s, 30s, 40s and 50s, they conducted experiments in association with the British Psychological Society in London, with the American Society in New York, with the Greek Society for Psychical Research in Athens. And for several decades, they tested these experiments, these hypotheses, and what they were trying to do was find an explanation as to how it worked, how the thought was carried from A to B. London to Australia, for example, these experiments were conducted. So it was Myers' work that inspired all this.
Well, it seems to me that people who have studied all of this work almost unanimously conclude that they established the existence of telepathy beyond any doubt.
Yes.
The question that remained, however, was the one that I know is important to you, and that is the idea of autonomous spiritual entities, the question of survival after death. That was clouded because a lot of the evidence for survival could be interpreted as telepathy.
Yeah, in fact, we mustn't neglect to mention that it was Myers that actually coined the term telepathy originally.
Yes.
And that's his legacy in our language. But it became apparent to me as I was studying and researching the work of Myers, where his intention was to find scientific evidence to support the theory that the soul survived bodily death. During his 20 years of research, he uncovered evidence to show that not only did the soul of the legitimate soul of the individual occupy the body, but other possessing entities did. That was not his intention. He discovered that during the course of his work.
Well, one of the great accomplishments of his 2-volume set, Human Personality, and its survival after death, is the delineation in great detail of a whole spectrum of human experiences in which evidence for survival would be on one extreme end, and evidence for hypnotic phenomenon and dreams would be perhaps on the other end, and many things in the middle, like telepathy.
Well, I like to use Myers' concept of the continuum of human experience. And he used a very, very valuable way of describing this, and that we can understand very simply. You and I, we can see light. A spectrum of light that's transmitted through a prism.
Yes.
And we can see the breakdown of those colours.
All the colours of the spectrum.
Of the spectrum. But what we can't see are ultraviolet and infrared.
Although we can measure them with our instruments.
That's right.
We know they're there.
So Myers liked to use that analogy and suggest that what we perceive with our senses is only a small part of the whole continuum of human experience. Yeah. And he resisted the use of in fact he objected to the use of the word supernatural, and said nothing is super nature, it's all nature. We may not be able to see it, but we can incorporate it on a continuum of natural experience. And he also objected to the use of the word paranormal, and said nothing is extra normal or paranormal, it's all normal. And that's the contribution that Myers made to the scientific study of spiritual phenomena.
And I think it's important for our viewers to understand that at the conclusion of all of his investigations, Myers felt that at least he personally, in a dramatic way, was convinced of human survival.
Absolutely. And he declared that in the scientific investigation of spiritual phenomena, and I notice I use the word spiritual, not psychic phenomena, but spiritual phenomena, that a start had been made. And he felt sure that a scientific investigation, a start had been made. But that was over 125 years ago. And we're still... where is the rest of mainstream psychology with the start that he initiated? They've lost it, haven't they? Lost the start.
Well, Myers' colleague, William James, once said that we can't measure progress in this field by the decade as we might with other disciplines. We have to look at it by the century and the half century. Progress is very slow. Taking something like the scientific method and trying to apply it to a question like life after death. And I think it's also fair to point out that not all of Myers' colleagues in the Society for Psychical Research agreed with his conclusion about survival.
Well, quite so. And I agree with you that these things do take time, and we do need patience. It takes time for a paradigm shift in scientific thinking. But having said that, as we sit here at this moment in time, whilst the scientists and the philosophers are still debating these issues, people are suffering. They're suffering from spirit possession. We know how to deal with it, and we can show science how it's done.
Well, I'm glad that you and I are going to have another interview specifically on that topic. But I think for now, it's important to talk about what occurred after Myers' death, because there's good evidence in the annals of the Society for Psychical Research that once he died, and as I recall 1901 or so, he began communicating through mediums himself.
Yes.
He revealed a great deal of information, and he even, as I understand it, devised experiments that he could control from the other side.
I thank you, Jeffrey, for reminding me about that. I'd almost forgotten that. Yes, and I've referenced it in my book. I'm trying to think. It was it Saltmarsh who wrote a book, The Future and Beyond, about what's known as the classic cross-correspondence.
The cross-correspondences.
Communications with Myers. Yes.
These are some of I regard them as among the strongest pieces of evidence we have pointing towards survival.
Because Myers declared that when he passed over into the afterlife, he would continue his work in producing scientific evidence to prove his existence after death. And he did that. He did it in more than one work. He did it in the cross-correspondence.
Let's define for our viewers what we mean by cross-correspondences.
This is where recipients of information receive information from him in three completely separate and non-connected locations.
Different continents.
Different continents. There was one in India, one in the United States, and one in England.
Right.
There? And the information received by each recipient was meaningless to them until it was all put together and then understood as component parts of a whole at the Society.
It was like a puzzle that fit together. And the puzzle, as I understand it, was the expression of Myers' own unique personality, because he was a poet and he was a classical Greek scholar.
Exactly. Yes.
And when you put the puzzle together, there were all sorts of literary allusions and classical Greek allusions that were very much reminiscent of Myers' own writings.
And there
in
was
those
only
areas.
one personality that could actually contribute all those different parts of the puzzle, and that was Frederic Myers. But he also communicated with another medium whose name escapes me, but the name of the book is Vanishing Knights. Did you come across Vanishing Knights?
I'm not aware of that.
It's in paperback. Vanishing Knight. I can't remember the name of the author. I'm sorry about that, but she channeled communications from Myers, and you may also be interested to know that he's still continuing to work, and I am in contact with mediums who still communicate with Myers.
How interesting.
There's a couple in Chicago, and they have written 8 books. The first one was entitled Heaven Can Help, and they write as John and Martha McGinnis. That's MCGINNIS. And the most recent book, the 8th one, was called The Resurrection of Clifford McGinnis, which is about their son who died recently. And they've had, particularly of interest to me, and this is why they contacted me in the first place, because they learned about my membership of the Society for Psychical Research and my interest in Frederic Myers and about my book from Lao Tzu, and they have communicated with both those characters and written about it in their books, and they continue to do so.
When you say both those characters,
Lao Tzu and Frederic Myers.
Okay.
And they've been, I know this sounds odd, but I've been told by the medium and the writers that they've been discussing my work between them.
Okay. Well,
take it with a pinch of salt.
Now let me, yes, a pinch of salt.
Even I have difficulty in acknowledging some of this.
Well, really. Surely, you've had scientific training, and as much as you have one foot clearly in the spiritualist camp, you're also a man of inquiry and philosophy and science. So I think skepticism is a healthy thing. Very, very healthy. And what it enables us to do, when I say us, people like me who work with a foot in both camps, it enables us to continue asking questions and asking for validity and verification. For example, if you get a message about what is affecting someone, and I know this is going to step into the realm of spirit release therapy, you need to know what kind of spirit you're dealing with. So you need concrete evidence. You need to know how to ask questions and get accurate answers. And skepticism is healthy, especially if you are being deceived. And that takes us into the realm of identifying the difference between good spirit and bad spirit, when bad spirit is very clever
deceiving us.
Well, and I suspect that there's probably another category of spirits, deceased human beings who are tricksters.
Yes, you've got deceased human beings, you've got discarnate entities that are non-human, that could be described in religious language as demonic.
Yeah.
And you've got another very, very large category of entities that are not of this earth at all. The extraterrestrials, the aliens.
Extraterrestrials, and if we look at folklore, we've got elementals, elves and fairies and gnomes.
And I've encountered discarnate intelligent entities that I've not yet found in the literature. Attached to people, feeding off their energy, alien life forms that are very difficult to in fact, I think William Baldwin suggested that there was a category that was non-identifiable.
I see. Well, I think, and of course we'll be talking about William Baldwin and spirit release therapy in a separate interview, but with regard to the Society for Psychical Research, they have now been active for nearly 150 years. Their archives are filled with unusual cases.
Yes. But primarily in recent years, their focus seems to be on providing a platform for individual independent researchers. They don't research as an organization, but they provide an intellectual framework for scholars and researchers who are independent, and they do provide from time to time research funding. But their researchers are primarily what you would, I suppose, call researchers into the paranormal.
Well, I'm a member, you are a member. I think any of our viewers who are serious about pursuing a academic study or a professional study in this area would do well to join. Terry Palmer, our time is up once again. It goes quickly. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
And thank you for being with us.